Second, the revolution that formed this nation was based on the principle that the people had the right to change their government. This is explicitly stated in the Declaration of Independence. It says that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. As that right existed then, it exists today. And finally, people from previous generations cannot bind future generations to servitude. Therefore, the fact one generation voted to become part of a union cannot force future generations to remain part of that perpetual agreement. Thus, generations need to make their own decisions whether or not they want to stay in the union. Ultimately, it's a case of self-determination. So, the Children of Liberty was formed to accomplish this. If we're free, then we have the right to our life, liberty, and property. And then we also, as a group, have the right to come together for the mutual enjoyment of our life, liberty, and property. And this right is ours, and no government can take it from us. Because if they can, then we're no longer individuals, we're property of the state. This is a quote that I saw a while back, and some of you may have seen it. I think it's a great description of the cycle of civilizations, and I'm just going to throw it up here for you to read instead of me reading it to you. Just keep in mind, it was written 200 years ago, and I think it's correct in the way he describes things. I believe it's clear we are at the stages of apathy and dependency. And personally, I'd like to avoid bondage and go back with people of faith and courage to liberty. So that's the point of the organization. So what's the plan? Briefly and most importantly, we need to organize together into one group that's committed to the mission of creating a new nation based on liberty, free market capitalism, and a constitutionally limited government. The group is open. Anybody who wants to join us will be wide open and inclusive. Most importantly, though, it has to be nonviolent. I mean, I can't see founding a libertarian nation based on violence, and I don't think we'd succeed going the violent route. While most won't support us, what we need is a majority not to support government action against us. And violence and any talk of violence will give the government the ability to turn the people against the organization. The steps, again, first is organization building. After the organizations build up to what I would call a critical mass, then we can decide where the geography is. And keep in mind, it's an international organization. Like I said earlier, I think people outside the United States, this would strike more accord with because they've had a lot of them have had to live through terrible situations worse than what we're going through. So we can figure out the geography and where to form the nation later after we built the organization up. Timing, I believe the time is right for a revolution with what I've said here before. And keep in mind, you don't need millions of people to pull this off. There's 20 nations in the world today that have less than 200,000 people in them. There's 7 billion people in the world. How many people do you think would rather live in a libertarian society than where they're at today? Probably a lot more than 200,000. And I get asked by people, do I think people would pick up and move together and do this? And I think, and I say, yeah. I said, look at the people that are walking from Honduras and Guatemala all the way to Texas. And that's a pretty long walk. And most of them are doing it just to find a better life for themselves and their families. So yeah, I think people would be motivated to go move to a libertarian society. And also, I'd make the point that a truly libertarian society would attract both capital and labor. Capital always goes to where it's best treated. And what nation would treat capital better than a libertarian society that's based on embracing free market capitalism and enforcing a constitutionally limited government? And once capital flows in, labor would flow in. And I think if this society can get created, very shortly afterwards, you'd have an economic boom to start off with.